Okay, looks like we're live on MythVision Podcast. Get ready to witness the oldest Bible known to mankind in the world. Our upcoming stream will zoom in so close, you'll feel like you're touching the scroll. But wait, should we even call this the Bible? Honestly, is it called the Bible at this time, or is it just an out of place term for the period? Are we anachronistically pushing this back onto this ancient scroll where these pen scribes wrote these pieces of literature? And all of these mysteries in this episode are going to be uncovered as we delve deeper into the topic with the one and only Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, Kipp Davis. So I hope that you stay tuned and wait to see what we reveal to you, because you're going to see some things you've probably never noticed in your entire life.
Back in Washington, Kipp Davis is getting his first look at a final prized fragment in the Museum of the Bible's collection.
This is a fragment that contains text from Genesis chapter 32, and it's supposedly from the 1st century BC or the 1st century CE.
Welcome to MythVision, Dr. Kipp Davis. Welcome back, my friend.
Hey, man. It's good to be here.
It really is. It's always a great time having you on here. We're going to learn something new today, that's for sure. We're going to be focusing on the earliest.
Yeah, we are.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
It sure is.
Absolutely. So tell us, you've got a YouTube channel where you educate the world and bring this insight to the public.
One viewer at a time.
One viewer, one subscriber. You can play a special part, the viewer, by subscribing to Dr. Kipp Davis, liking his content, dropping a comment so the algorithm gods pay attention, and help out Dr. Kipp. Let's get him up to 10K. There's no reason he's not at 10,000 subscribers right now. I also want to highlight
it's a conspiracy.
It is 100%. The cabal is against you. Later, my dear friend Derek Bennett from Atheologica is interviewing none other than Dr. Kill, which is the pseudonym for Dr. Kipp. I hope everybody will go. I'm going to post this, or ask that mods throughout this live stream will post this so people know about this upcoming stream. They're going to go into God's. Tease us. What are you guys doing?
We're doing different stuff from what we're doing here today. So it's important that people know that. We're going to talk about God's body. We're going to talk about Deuteronomy 32. We're probably going to talk about, you know, some of the trouble that I got in, and the controversy that surrounded me, and the Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries from the Museum of the Bible. You know, normal stuff. Normal
Just the
stuff.
scholarly drama. So subscribe to Dr. Kill and subscribe to Atheologica, because we're growing a massive community educating you. He
And people,
also,
sorry, I was just going to say people should know, because I'm looking at a lot of the comments in the chat. So I just got back from seeing Yahweh's visage,
that's
which is
why you're glowing.
why my face glows like the sun.
It makes
So
sense. I'm
yes,
convinced. I was a little
yes.
terrified. I didn't want to show my fear, though, because I
He
have to
probably
host.
showed you his ass, which
Yes,
is why it looks like you're shrouded in darkness.
this is exactly
There.
what's going on. Yeah, this
So
is.
he was showing you his ass while he was turning to show me his face.
I'm with you, man. Look, I'm going to tell you. I think you're onto something here. You also produce content and are growing a Patreon,
Working on it,
however
yeah.
you pronounce this thing. Go
It's
join him, help him. You can harass him in the comments. Tell
it's
us a little bit about the Patreon.
yeah, so it's cheap. you can join for like I think it's like $3.50 or $4 depending on where you're from. I'm a Canadian, so the currency is always a mystery to me. But you will get early access to all of my videos, including everything that is coming out in my epic series, The Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically. Um, and if you're a premier member, we started doing this a couple months ago. We've
Mhm.
started doing monthly live meetups.
Right.
I meet up with interested patrons from all over the globe. I've had to split this now into 2 sessions on our meetup day, just to make sure that, you know, we can satisfy everybody from Europe to the East Coast to the West Coast in Australia.
Wow.
But it's super fun. We just sit and we chill and we chat. I answer questions. I have had some special guests just drop in, you know, for some chats.
So
And
go support what we're
go
doing. Go.
support, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
And it helps me a ton, because like this series, especially on the Dead Sea Scrolls that I'm trying to build, is a massive undertaking. Um and people should be watching it. And if you haven't yet, please watch from the start. But what I'm attempting to do, which is completely new and completely different, is to tell the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls in exceptional detail, but not just the story of the texts and their contents, but also the history of their discovery, and how the discovery and what was happening in the world around the time of this discovery really shaped the way in which scholarly conversations about the scrolls have proceeded over the course of the last 70 years. So it's and it's all of course built within the title. It's Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically. The other thing I'm trying to do is to set the record straight about a lot of the apologetic claims that Christians tend to make about the scrolls, which quite frankly are just not, they're just not right. They're not correct. They're misleading. So let's learn about the scrolls.
Let's learn about the scrolls. You have something important that I think is necessary to repeat if you haven't done it on air yet, as we're leading up to the oldest Bible or oldest scroll known. And that is when you came and visited me and we recorded the 18 lecture course, which when this gets done, trust me, you'll know we'll be screaming it from the rooftops and getting people to sign up for that course. A lot of hard work put into that, and you put so much energy and time into it. But you mentioned how your teacher was saying that the Dead Sea Scroll scholar is in the best position of being able to discuss Old Testament studies because it is the oldest material evidence for scripture, as we call it, known. So there is no, I mean, maybe you might find some fragment or something from maybe an inscription or something that might relate or be something we find that I guess you could say fits something that is biblical in its teaching, kind of like the Mount Ebal curse tablet, right? Wherever you date it, whenever you date it, this is authentic. Okay. It has curses on it. And like we know the biblical narrative talks about curses, and this mountain may have carried a tradition where people went to this area to curse people. Okay. That doesn't mean that's scripture or that was canonical or anything like that. But this might have been a practice that found its way within the text that we call the Bible. So the earliest material data is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Can you tell us why that's so significant?
So, well, first of all, I wanted to riff a little bit on what you said at the start of your little bit there. My doctor father, George J. Brooke at the University of Manchester, used to complain about this quite a bit. He told me that when he taught Introduction to the Old Testament, he always started with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the reason he started there, and the reason why I think it's an excellent place to begin, is because this is our earliest material evidence for anything even resembling a Bible. It's no short of a consternation for myself, for other scholars of early Judaism and the Dead Sea Scrolls in particular. I've applied for positions in Old Testament departments at universities, and this is a common thing. Like when people like me who've spent their lives studying the scrolls will apply for positions in Old Testament departments at universities, it's not uncommon to get a response from the search committees going, "Well, you're not really an Old Testament scholar," which drives me crazy because if you're a Dead Sea Scroll scholar, of course you are deeply invested in what the Old Testament is about, where it came from, and what's going on in there. And what I continue to tell people is that, again, this should be the starting point, and that's kind of what we're doing here today. Instead of speaking of the first Bible, the origins of the Bible, from where we think it should have began. Well, book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible. It starts with the story of Adam and Eve, or if you're a slightly more critical thinker than that, they started putting together traditions of the Torah all the way back in the First Temple period, during the reigns of David and Solomon, or Hezekiah, or who have you. Maybe did they?
Right.
We tend to think, yeah, probably, but this is something that that Christian apologists will continue to remind us of, is that you can't prove any of that, and they're absolutely right. So what do we have? We've got manuscripts, and the manuscripts we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls are predominantly from the 1st century BCE. And we've got a bunch from the 1st century CE. So it's like from 100 BC to probably 67 CE, which is when we tend to think that the community was driven out by the Romans, and the site was destroyed. But we also have stuff there that's a fair bit older than that. We have manuscripts, quite a bunch from the 2nd century BCE, and we even have a handful, one of which we're going to show
Yeah.
today, way back from the mid 3rd century BCE. So we have a small handful of copies of texts from the time when some people probably actually could remember uh Alexander the Great. It was in the middle, text from right in the middle of when Hellenism was becoming deeply integrated into the cultural religious expressions of the people who collected this literature. We have texts that come from a time prior to the establishment of the independent kingdom of the Hasmoneans in 180 BCE. So we've got a handful of these manuscripts which are very, very old. So I don't know. Do you want to show it now?
Yeah, I think I do. I want to tease people, just saying, get ready. We're going to show you the oldest, at least according to the consensus of Dead Sea Scroll scholars that have evaluated this, the oldest
Yep.
papyri known.
It's not papyrus.
Oh, it isn't? What is it? Animal
Parchment.
skin?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay, parchment.
There's not a
Sorry.
lot. So, okay. And while you bring that up, I'll say something else about this. So, most of the scrolls are actually parchment,
Okay.
animal skin. There are papyrus. There are papyri in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and one of the interesting ongoing questions that scholars are continuing to investigate is the relationship between, like, why write on parchment, why write on papyrus. We now know, and this is, within the last 20 years, we now know that unlike uh, earlier ideas about papyrus, it didn't all come out of Egypt. There are places in the deep south of Palestine where it looks like Jews were actually growing and cultivating their own papyrus.
Around the Dead Sea?
Not farther south than that. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah. So it's pretty interesting, and like here we'll get into this, but like one of the wrinkles that papyrus has added to this whole conversation is that, I mean, the as far as we can tell, the general rule here is that it's a cheaper, more accessible material.
Mhm.
So it's, you write on papyrus something that you want, but doesn't necessarily need to have the kind of endurance and longevity that would be required of something like an animal skin, right? So automatically, the expectation is, well, the most important stuff you're going to put on parchments, on animal skins, and stuff that is less important, so-called individual copies, like personal copies of text, as opposed to stuff that's maybe used by the community, you might put on papyrus. But we've got copies of biblical texts on papyrus, as
And so both are there.
yeah,
What we're looking at, as you say, animal skin, parchment. And so
yeah,
let's just go ahead and show them,
bring it
because
up.
we're going to zoom in real close. This is going to be cool. I hope
Yeah,
everybody hits the like button, drops comments in the chat. When this is over, leave a comment, all that cool stuff. Make sure you check out all their channels. And let's go ahead and take a peek here at the oldest one. And that is, what is this?
so pull it up. There we go. Zoom in a little bit. So this is one of, I believe it's 3 or 4 fragments of 4Q17. This is a copy of text from Exodus chapter 38, 39, 40. and it looks like Leviticus chapter 1 and possibly even a little bit of chapter 2. Now this is a very interesting set of fragments from a very interesting scroll for a few reasons. In the first place, the script that has been used to pen this indicates to scholars that this is a very, very old manuscript. So people don't know the predominant method for dating manuscripts is by way of the handwriting through a system called paleography. So, on the basis of the handwriting, this manuscript has been dated to, you know, roughly about 250 BCE. Based on what remains, we are confident that this is actually a very large manuscript. On the basis of the science, the mechanics of how scrolls were stored and then deteriorated, as a general rule of thumb, where you have large fragments, and this would constitute a large fragment. This particular one measures about I think it's 14 centimeters across. Where you have large fragments, they survive from a bulk, a considerable amount of material, which suggests this was a large scroll. And of course, because of the contents, you've got a transition here from the end of the book of Exodus and the beginning of the book of Leviticus. Uh, I I think scholars tend to be agreed that this most likely was a scroll that contained all of something, well, all of the book of Exodus, or something very closely resembling our copy of the book of Exodus, and the book of Leviticus, which would have made it a very, very large document. The scholars who did the work on this, Frank Morecross, and I don't remember the other guy, they concluded, they calculated that this manuscript at one time had 60 lines roughly in a column. And if you've seen the videos in my any of the first 3 videos in my series on the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll understand right at the outset what this means. This is a big manuscript, and it's unusually large because in the period, people tended not to construct manuscripts of this size. They tended to be shorter, um, and yeah, shorter and less fat, I guess, for lack of a better word. So 60 lines in a column is substantial. What we have here, and if you go towards the bottom here, Derek, I'll
Uh-huh.
show you something significant that we have here is actually preservation of the bottom margin
Oh,
of this manuscript, which measures about 2 centimeters. And that is also an indicator to scholars that this was a sizable manuscript, because as a convention in this period, you you uh, you constructed your manuscripts, and the margins you supplied to them were relative. Smaller margins for smaller manuscripts, larger margins for larger manuscripts. A 2 centimeter margin is substantial. So this was a very large, um, very significant copy of Exodus and Leviticus. Something like this would have been extremely expensive to produce. These are the sorts of things that tended not to be produced and owned by individuals, but rather by communities, and used in probably some a sort of synagogue setting. So that's, I mean, in terms of the Bible, right?
this is
That's
the
as early
oldest.
as that. This is the oldest Hebrew copy of Hebrew literature that we have. And making this distinction is very important. I noticed somebody mentioned in the chat. It's one of the super chats we'll get to. But the Ketif Hinnom amulets preserve text from the Aaronic blessing, which appears in Numbers. But these aren't. This is not a Bible, right? These were little amulets that were inscribed with text, and they were rolled up, and somebody wore them around their necks or attached to their body somewhere, probably as like magical protection devices. So this is not a. We should qualify that a Bible has to be a text that you can read and that you can use. It's also a substantial collection of literature. So this is the best that we've got. We've got a scroll that was large, a scroll that contained text from two supposed compositions, Exodus and Leviticus all together. And it's something that people used and that they read.
Real quick,
So
someone brought up the Septuagint, right? And they say the oldest
Yeah.
Bible, and notice the term Bible keeps coming up,
yeah,
is the Septuagint. But let me ask you this, since we're
Don't know.
not dealing with that term, this canonical, or we have this like grouped literature that we have defined, clearly defined. We don't know, this being honest, but we don't know what they considered their canon or Bible or whatever, if that was even a thing to them. Like, obviously they saw this as sacred literature in some way. This was important literature in some way. Nobody's denying that. The category of scripture and Bible, we have ideas of what that means. We need to strip that out of our head when we're reading or looking at this right here and saying, they have the same idea about all of this as we do. No, we don't know that, especially when they're rewriting older literature to make their own narratives about it, like Jubilees, etc. And Matthew Munger does that. So this is my question, just to make sure we're on the same page. This is Hebrew, very difficult to read. It's worn out quite a lot. But is this the oldest biblical literature, older than any Greek manuscript, older than anything?
We don't have any Greek manuscripts this old containing any quote unquote biblical text. And I think it's I need to point this out. Like, we don't know nearly as much about the Septuagint as we think we do. Like, we've got a handful of fragments. We've got traditions about how it was produced, and I tend to think there's a kernel of truth behind this.
Right.
That the Septuagint is a collection of Hebrew scriptures that came out of Alexandria at some point in the 3rd century. But what we're dealing with here, if people don't know, there are 3 primary versions of the biblical text, of the Old Testament text, that scholars will talk about. Those are the Masoretic text tradition, the Septuagint text tradition, and the Samaritan Pentateuch text tradition. So these are all textual families which have varying differences between them, which look like they were produced and then collected together in like a stream of a community. They tend to be geographically grouped. The Septuagint tradition is believed to have come out of Egyptian Jewish communities. The Samaritan tradition is believed to have stemmed from Palestine. And, the Masoretic tradition is believed to have come from the Jewish communities living in Babylon. This is all theory at this point. I think there's some there's some currency to this, but it's, again, this is still stuff that we're just kind of piecing together. So all that said, when it comes to tracing these traditions back, here's what we discover is that we kind of come to a starting point, and it's the same for all of them. At some point, probably in the early 3rd, maybe the late 4th, early 3rd century BCE. That's sort of as far back as we can track this stuff, realistically. This is where it all began. And as I mentioned to an apologist that people might be familiar with on Twitter, Dr. Stephen Boyce, I was in a conversation with him on the phone once, not that long ago, talking about this issue. And as I said it to him, anything back prior to, like the early third, late fourth century with regards to the text, with regards to the religion, it's a black box.
Mm.
We just can't get in there. There's very little actual material culture that survives from the period that provides us any meaningful insight into what was going on in Judaism at the period. So
So Jonathan
it's
Adler
this is
interviewed.
exactly what Jonathan Adler talks about.
Yes, his book on the origins of
Yeah,
Judaism as a religion. And
yeah,
obviously, this goes into your course actually a little, just to tease people what the common religion of the Jews, or if we could even use the term, because that might be anachronistic as well. Okay,
yeah,
Judeans, Judaios, okay, the people who are located in this region, okay, that have Jerusalem as their central focal point, which was not always the case. That's a whole nother rabbit trail within that black box that you're talking about, Kipp, that we
yep,
do not have material evidence prior, let's just say third century. Like before that, we're not sure about synagogues. We're not sure about what,
yeah,
like these sacred baths where they would go and they would wash, and you name it, even kosher food. I mean, there's so many things we don't know. And we're looking at the oldest text right
yeah.
here that we have. So, I mean,
So
this is fascinating.
yeah, I got to say something. We're going to talk a little bit about language here at some point too. But I want to read something
Okay.
about this particular manuscript.
Let me
Whoops,
pull
that's
it
the
back
wrong
up then.
window. So yeah,
Got it.
pull
I'm
it
going to
back up. I'm going
zoom
to read
out. I'm
something.
moving it around a little to get people like to actually see zooming in.
Yeah,
It's kind of cool. This is an animal skin for those who
yeah,
don't know. So
yeah. It's vellum.
vellum.
Uh,
Do we
so
know what
I
kind of animal this was?
probably calf skin.
Okay.
The vast majority of the scrolls, I believe, are are Jewish cows, as
Got it.
Craig Evans put it in that terrible interview with Sean McDowell. But yeah, there's goat skin in there as well. But it's so we determine this stuff through DNA testing. Of course, not every fragment from every Dead Sea Scrolls has been DNA tested, and I have no idea what this particular one was, but it was probably cow, possibly goat. So I want to read just a paragraph here from the edition published about this particular manuscript with regards to the actual text. Okay, so this is Frank Morecross writing here. He says the relationship in 4Q Exodus Leviticus F, that's the designation for this manuscript, to the other textual families, that's the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Septuagint, and the Masoretic text, can be summarized as follows. In no case does 4Q Exodus Leviticus F stand with the Masoretic text alone against either the Samaritan Pentateuch or the Septuagint, or the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint together in inferior or, for that matter, superior readings. Nor does 4Q Exodus Leviticus F side with the Septuagint alone against the Samaritan Pentateuch or the Masoretic text, or the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Masoretic text together in secondary readings. Its filiation to judge from significant inferior readings is with the Samaritan tradition. But at the same time, its freedom and tendency towards expansion provide an interesting insight into the early stage of Pentateuchal text in Palestine. We must conclude that 4Q Exodus Leviticus F, this manuscript, is an early, direct, or better collateral witness to the textual family, which has been called Proto-Samaritan, and which I prefer to label as Palestinian. So what he's saying here is that for the most part, this looks like a member of the so-called Samaritan Pentateuch family texts on the
Ooh.
basis of the readings that have survived in this manuscript. But something important that he notes is that being said, there's still lots of places within just these few fragments where there seems to be, a tendency towards readings in the Septuagint as well as towards the Masoretic text. There's places where we find agreement with all of the editions. So it's predominantly Samaritan, but it sort of goes back to a time even prior to or at the point in which these individual streams of traditions are starting to settle and become more distinct from
Wow.
one another, which is pretty wild, pretty interesting. So, but I think it's important to at this point to talk about language and what language can tell us about the origins of the Bible and the origin of the biblical text. So the script that we're looking at here, the language is Hebrew. The script that we're looking at is Aramaic. The Hebrew script is what we now call Paleo Hebrew, which is an unfortunate term. It's better appropriated as simply Hebrew, or even better, just Canaanite, because it's the same script that was used by everybody in the the mid to late Iron Age region of what we now call Palestine. It's the script that everybody used. It's not Hebrew. It was used by the Canaanites as well. So we have manuscripts from Qumran that are written in this Canaanite Paleo Hebrew script. The Samaritan Pentateuch was after the establishment of this Samaritan community in and around Mount Gerizim, which happened in this same period of time, somewhere in the late 4th, early 3rd century BCE. They started to collect all their written traditions, their texts, using this old Canaanite script. So this is an Aramaic script. The Aramaic script is something that the Jews developed out of Babylon, basically. The Greek, the Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible are written in Greek with a Greek script. So now, I mean, there's a temptation here to think that, well, the Samaritans are preserving all their texts, and bear in mind, for the Samaritans, it's just the Torah, nothing but the Torah, right? Surely they've they're just preserving the way that it was always written in this very old Canaanite script. Really? Is that the way it goes? Or is it rather that the Samaritans have adopted this text and determined that we're going to write this using the old Canaanite script because of our deference to the ancient religion, to our ideas about the antiquity, and to the, not using that impure Aramaic script, that's associated with Babylon. We're going to use like the old original script. And I think there's something important to note here, is that yes, we have copies of Torah texts that came that are in the form of the Canaanite script. They were written in this Paleo Hebrew script, but these are a minority. By far, the vast majority of manuscripts that we have, Hebrew manuscripts, are written using this Aramaic script. Importantly, we have nothing of the Hebrew prophets written in a Canaanite script. Why is this important? So I'll answer my own question. This is important. Were you killing? Were you going, oh God, what's the answer?
No. I just find it's funny how you, yeah.
So if the Hebrew prophets were writing in Iron Age Palestine, in the Cisjordan, whatever it is, they would have been writing in the conventional Canaanite script of the day. If that is the case, then why no copies of the prophets in a Canaanite script? Why is everything written in this Aramaic script, which is something that the Jews, or for lack of a better term, the Jews didn't really even start to use until after the Babylonian exile. I think this whole discussion of languages and scripts is pretty significant and
Mhm.
important when it comes to talking about where the Bible came from, how old it actually is, and yeah.
Okay, so there's some great stuff here to think, and this is a weird text to have Samaritan slash, the various types of manuscript data that we're looking at. Is where's this tradition coming out of? Is it a
Yeah.
combination? In fact, another way to put it, I'm going to use a New Testament thing that I'm more familiar with. Paula Fredrickson went on record on MythVision when I interviewed her about Paul, and I'm like, Paul's waiting for the end to happen, right? Paul's ready for the end to happen, and he writes like it's going to be soon, like the Lord's going to come, and those of us who remain are going to be caught up in the air with him, the whole nine. And she said something, and it just blew my mind. And it was so just silly and like common sense to her, but it was like not stuff that we think about. And she said, well, Paul's late. And I'm like, what? Because we're always going, our earliest New Testament data is from Paul. And this is really, really early stuff because we have this. There is an apologetic agenda to go, man, it goes right back to the guy. And like, we have this super confidence. And she goes, Paul's late. In fact, his apocalypticism is like, oh my gosh, Lord, you better hurry up. Is it going to happen? They're all worried if it's even going to happen. That's why he's writing the letter to the Thessalonians. Now, like using that analogy to go back to this literature we're looking at, which is the oldest fragment of something that we have on animal skin, parchment. This is late, is another way of looking at it. That is using multiple. I know it's early as far as the data we have, but it's like we can't
The way
see
we
behind this.
conceptualize this, it's late.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's like swallow that pill. Try to wrap your head around that.
Yeah. So that's manuscripts. Let's talk about this idea of text and this idea of the Bible. One of the things that I spend quite a bit of time. This is basically the feature of my latest video, number 3 in my series, The Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically, which just dropped yesterday. The title of that video is "What is a biblical text, anyways?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very important question when it comes to assessing the evidence that we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I would say even more broadly in terms of assessing all of these textual traditions that we've inherited: the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Septuagint, the Masoretic text. So one of the problems that we encounter when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they have been already pre-classified for us. You'll notice the title, the name, that the classification that's been designated for this particular manuscript is 4Q Exodus Leviticus F, right? And the reason for that is because it appears to have been a copy of Exodus and Leviticus. When the first scholars started working through, sifting through literally hundreds and hundreds, and then it became thousands and thousands of fragments of material, they had to work pretty quickly. They had to work efficiently. You start from, what you know. And for them, it was like, I can identify these fragments as quote unquote biblical text. These belong to books from, our Hebrew Bible that we know. So these fragments, these manuscripts here are biblical, right? Anything that doesn't appear in our Bibles has now been classified by the first scholars who handled this material as non-biblical. So how does this affect the way we even start to think about this material, about this literature? We're already starting from an
Can I pause you
anachronistic.
just a second to emphasize that? People like me, man, will hear something twice, 3 times, and it finally clicks. I want to emphasize non-canonical material that was seemingly just as valued as what we call canonical material is found lumped together with all of this material we're finding, correct?
Yeah. So, and this is, yeah, so this is the problem, right? Um how do you, in the beginning, scholars were just uh analyzing the manuscripts on the basis of the texts, the contents, what they contained, what it's about, what sort of a text this seems to be. Oh, it's a copy of Samuel. This is a biblical text.
Right.
Oh, this is a copy of Enoch. That's a non-biblical text. Oh, this is a copy of Ben Sira. Yes, there's Ben Sira at Qumran. This is a non-biblical text. So, and then, oh, here's something that nobody on the planet has ever seen before. This is a non-biblical text. But what we've encountered, so I
Oh,
made an important
you've
point.
mentioned this too, though, Dr. Kipp.
What's
That,
this?
oh, this is Isaiah. This is but there's stuff in this what? Hold on. It's not biblical? Something's
Yeah.
wrong here, but go ahead.
So one of the when I one of the I would say the points of real confusion within the study of the Dead Sea Scrolls where this happened was when they discovered, or when they started working through a set of manuscripts I talk about in my video called Reworked Pentateuch. And these are, you know, it's it's is there Genesis? I'm trying to remember if there is, but it's certainly Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, right?
Uh-huh.
We can recognize the text from, these fragments, and it matches, versions of this that we have, in our Bibles. But then there's all sorts of different things, like substantially different things. In my video, I go through one part of one of these manuscripts where in one of these fragments, it's listing the festivals celebrated by the Hebrews that appear in Leviticus chapter 2. But then this manuscript, I kid you not, adds like a full paragraph of material to the text of Leviticus 2 in order to legitimate the celebration of the festival of new oil and the festival of wood, which are not festivals that appear in the official listing in Leviticus. So, and this is not to say that, oh, this at one time went way back to, the beginnings when, and this is the original reading. No, I would say more importantly, what's happening here is a writer, or like an author or a scribe, uh, is a celebrator. He honors these festivals of wood and oil. They're really important in his estimation, but he also has this strong conviction that we must only observe those festivals that were mandated by Moses. So what's the solution to this? It's pretty simple. You just ensure that you include it in your text as mandated by Moses. You just
So they are saying that Moses
you just
kind of
add
said,
it. Yes.
huh.
Yes.
So that it
But
wasn't, we might look at that today, and this is so modern of us. So I want you to really nail me on this, because I'm guilty of it. I try not to be, as I educate myself with scholars. This is something I want to teach the skeptics or atheist community to follow suit of, like trying to listen to what the academics are saying and keep up with what is going on there. But like, we might look at that and go, that's a lie. That is so dishonest. And they're saying Moses said that. Come on, they're making stuff up. That's not true. And even if literally that is the case, maybe the mode in which they operate in their mind isn't they're actually trying to be deceptive. They
Nope.
somehow believe that this is really, I don't know, how would you put that?
I have no doubt in my mind that whoever the first one was to include that tradition honestly believed, you know, and even like I think it's probably simplest to think that the people living in the 4th or the 3rd century BCE, or even the 2nd century BCE, I think the simplest way, it's simplest to think that they had a concept. They understood that Moses was an actual guy who did these actual things, and these
Mhm.
actual things happened in the history of Israel. But there again, I mean, we don't. There's no certainty that everybody believed that. I mean, it seems entirely likely to me as well that there were surely people who said, "Yeah, that's bullshit," right? But it's important.
Right.
And whether he thought it was an actual guy, or whether he thought this was just this was a tradition that we've inherited that's super important, the way to ensure, I've no doubt that he thought this was originally the way it was supposed to be,
Right.
that these festivals were always supposed to be part of our religious observance, and he can't explain why they don't appear in Leviticus 2. In his mind, he's fixing the text. He's making sure it's right on the basis of how he understands his religion. But I think what we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls that gets me so excited, like Christian apologists are going to constantly point to the copies of quote unquote biblical copies of Bible that we have there and say, "Oh, look at how faithfully they've preserved these texts over the many years." It's a testament to the longevity of this tradition and the accuracy of these things that stretches all the way back to the very beginning. No, what we see actually in the scrolls, when you take a much more comprehensive view, not just of what we have classified as Bible, but of these other texts like reworked Pentateuch,
Mm.
which for all intents and purposes looks like it functioned in the very same way for these people as did any other copy of Leviticus. What we see in the Dead Sea Scrolls is a snapshot of textual development taking place before our very eyes. And it's something we see echoed already occurring in the biblical texts themselves. What is the book of Deuteronomy? It's a rewritten Bible. It's fixing the covenant code. What is the book of Chronicles? It's rewritten Bible. It's fixing the Deuteronomistic history that we've inherited in Samuel and Kings. So at one point,
I love that,
the
by the way.
prophet Jeremiah actually quotes or cites the prophet Micah in his own prophecies. What's he doing? He credits Micah. He says Micah said this, but then he's reconstituting this material and he's turning it into something new, something much more useful. This is something that was taking place. This is what was taking place from the very beginning, and it obviously continued all the way into the time of Jesus. There's still reappropriating these old texts,
The
and the
Gospels
changes
are an
are
example.
subtle. It's like, it's akin to evolution, right?
Yeah.
To thinking biologically. The changes that we can observe are subtle.
Right.
But when you map them out over, centuries, when this material was put together and created, they become big. They become massive. They become substantially more significant.
I'm just teasing people here to like, it's like dangling that yarn in front of the kitty cat to jump on your YouTube and go check your video out when we're done. But I love what you're saying here. We have super chats we're going to get to. We have another manuscript or
Yep.
another parchment we want to look at. I think it's a parchment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. It's parchment.
But I do want to say what you're saying is fantastic, because the same practice that happens within the tradition of rewriting their own tradition, you can apply the same thing with what we're seeing in Genesis about rewriting Mesopotamian stories, about they're
Exactly.
doing it with
Exactly.
other culture, but obviously combating it. So they're in direct opposition to the growth of civilization. There's all sorts of stuff going on there, but I'm actually doing that series with Dr. Josh, a scripted series on Genesis and where it gets its mythology from. But I love what you're saying here, because it makes sense as to why we as Christians have looked and said, thus it is written, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Huh? Then you go back and you're like, this has nothing to do with Jesus. But
Doesn't matter.
they make it all about Jesus. So
Yeah.
they weren't like, I can imagine anachronistically. I've had Rabbi Toby Singer come on and go, they're being deceptive. They're lying to you on purpose. And it's like,
They're
really?
just
Do we have
doing good? They're just doing good Jewish Bible exegesis. This is the way. This is the way. So it's how it was
Dude, your
done.
face is glowing even more right now. I'm starting to get terrified.
Oh, I'm sorry, man.
This is
Maybe
amazing.
we should look at this other manuscript. I wanted to show this other one because
Okay.
this is the other side of the discussion here of what we've been talking about. There's Gerald Lancaster Harding with his cigarette in his mouth. What a sexy dude.
Dude, that's pretty cool. I
All
always wondered about that too. All right, so here we are.
He was the director of the Palestinian and Antiquities department.
Okay.
At the time when the British mandate for Palestine came to an end, and the establishment of the state of Israel, and then the Arab state there as well. So, anyways, what we have here is a fragment of a very fine looking manuscript. So the amount of material that we have surviving from this particular manuscript is similar to the copy of of Exodus Leviticus that we saw earlier. So this is a large fragment. And remember what I said, this suggests strongly to us that this survived from a large manuscript. If you go to the bottom here, you will see preservation of a 2-centimeter margin, which also indicates to us that this is a surviving copy of a very large manuscript. The script itself is it's the kind of thing that it's the kind of thing that makes me horny. What can I say? When I look at this script, and if you zoom in on just one of these, like on this larger piece here, to take a look at just some of these beautiful letters. This is an exquisite script. This was written by a professional scribe. If you just actually pause it there, go back a little bit. Just a little bit. Yeah, stop there. If you look, you've got right almost in the center of your page, you actually have 2 occurrences on the other. Yeah, on bookends of where you're circling your cursor there, you have the same word, panim, and then el, and then panim again. And when you just look at the way the letters are formed on this on the word panim, you can see that each letter almost appears identical to its counterpart in the other word. This is an indicator to us that this is a professionally trained scribe. He is very, very experienced and excellent in his craft. This would have been produced by a member of what I would identify as a scribal guild. In the Hasmonean kingdom, at least, they had started to establish basically a professional class of scribes that wasn't necessarily attached to the temple establishment, but was, part of the merchant class, writers who would, for their vocation, write what people wanted them to. People would bring, a papyrus or a parchment to them and say, I want you to make a copy of this for me. I want you to make it this big or this small. And they would sit down and write it. What the professional scribal guilds gave us are lots and lots of these, exquisitely crafted and again very expensive to produce manuscripts.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular manuscript is not as old, not nearly as old as the other one. This
And
one,
what script is this? I mean, what book is this?
this is an Aramaic script, right?
Mhm.
Something that's interesting about this particular script, and one of the reasons I think it is as old as it is, I have dated this I just based on a cursory glance. I haven't taken the time to do it, and now I kind of like to actually sit down and date the thing. But just on the basis of what I'm seeing, it looks to me like it's probably mid second century BCE. I'd say
BCE.
BCE. So like somewhere between 150 to 100 BCE, second half of the second century BCE there. Now one of the interesting things about this script is if anybody knows what a lamed is, that's the Hebrew letter that makes the L sound, hence lamed. They're easy to find on any manuscript because it's like the only letter that the part of which actually it sticks up above the line. There it is. There's a lamed. One of the interesting things I think about this particular script with these lameds is they're quite wide. Many people who read Hebrew are unaware of this, but so they're not unaware of the fact that there are final letters, like there's a different form of certain letters that appear at the end of a word. That's common knowledge. But what many people are unaware of is that the letter lamed once had a final form, but it disappeared over time. We have a handful of manuscripts from Qumran where there are actual final lameds in them, distinct from lameds that occur in the middle of a word. But those are all gone. What I like about this particular manuscript is the way that the lameds look suggests to me that this is almost a fossil of a final lamed without actually being a final lamed. So I think it's at this transition point where the final lameds are gradually falling out of fashion. But the whoever learned to write and wrote this script is has come to the point where this final lamed form he probably learned, but is now incorporating throughout his construction of the manuscript. So this is like I said, exquisitely crafted text, manuscript, very expensive to produce. Obviously survives from a very large scroll on the basis of the size of this fragment, which measures, I believe it's about 16 centimeters across. The margins are big. That's like a 2.5 centimeter margin on the bottom. It was probably a 3 centimeter margin originally on the bottom. The intercolumnar margin is pretty sizable. It's about a centimeter. If you zoom in again, I'll show you something else. On the margins, you can actually see the lines. Do you see that?
Yeah.
The lines that he marked out in constructing his manuscript. That's super cool, I think. Right.
Yeah.
And something that's important here too is oftentimes when marking out, when putting the lines on your manuscript, you're only going to put horizontal lines, and then you're going to put a vertical line for where you start your column, right? What this guy has done, which he's actually put a margin to help him find the end of his column too.
But it seems like he's willing to go over it. Whereas on the starting line, you see how everything's uniform right here, where they starts from right to left. On the right side, this line goes through the letters, which means he may have went, hey, try not to go too much beyond this point.
You have to, right? This isn't Greek. You can't just start a word and continue it on the following line. You have to finish the word. So, and this is normal. Right margins in a scroll, a Hebrew scroll, are always, not going to be perfectly. Sorry, left margins are always not going to be perfectly uniform because they're ending the line and they end it where best they can. The other thing too, you'll notice there's a blank line here. There's a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is probably like the end of a paragraph of some sort. You'll see. Zoom out again.
Okay.
On the other column, you'll see another sizable break right in the middle of the line. So these are the sorts of indicators that show that this is a piece of literature. It's large. And it's expensive, it's exquisite. It was treasured by the community that collected it. So what does it say? So this is one of these types of manuscripts that scholars looked at it the first time and said, this is something that nobody's ever even seen before. So in that first column, you've got mention of, it says, for the tribe of Benjamin, Raphiah, for the tribe of Gad, Elio, and then there's a break, and then it says something like the rear guard, 20 years old, and then there's a break, and then it mentions a man from the Hasidim, and this is Moses. We know this is Moses because of what appears in the following column. It says a man from the Hasidim. He raised his voice. And then it breaks off, right? And then in the following line, it says, and his furious anger abated from Miriam. It says, and his furious anger abated, and Miriam was shielded from his eyes. So I think this line is talking probably about God, about Yahweh. And then in that final line there, it says, over or against us. And then it employs a feminine singular verb here and says, she will lead us. So like this is one of the frustrating things when it comes to text, dealing with text that you don't know or that you don't recognize, right? That's brand new. It's super fragmentary. So we've just got like these snippets of stuff that's going on, but we can't figure it all out because there's so much that's missing here, right?
Right.
To my ear, to my eye, this sounds kind of like Numbers chapter 12, Numbers 13. If you're unfamiliar, there's a point, but it seems almost reversed because I think it's in Numbers 13. There's an enumerate. There is Numbers 13 is the establishment of the Council of 70, where Moses, elects the 70 elders as representatives from the tribes, and they're all given names. And you see that here, right? For the tribe of Benjamin, some guy named Raphiah. For the tribe of Gad, some guy named Elio. Interestingly, these are not the names that appear in, the Masoretic text or the Septuagint. And then underneath the break there, it looks like this is similar to the story about Miriam and Aaron confronting Moses and challenging his authority, and then God striking Miriam with leprosy, and she has to beg Moses for healing, right?
Right.
So it kind of looks like that, but I don't know. I mean, this is the best that I can do here, right? So we can see more of what's going on in the next column, and I'll read to you here what I have.
And where are we at do you know exactly where on this we're at?
So I'll start at the top of the column on column 2. So you see the second column there?
Not really.
Yeah. So on the left side, the big text on the left side, it's like that whole column of text, right? Yeah, that's the column. The second column we're going to deal with now. Okay. All that. So, and again, you'll notice too, there's stuff missing, right? There's damage and there's breaks and stuff. So it's incomplete, but we can see a lot more of what's going on here. So, it starts off from where there's just a word all on its own that survives from a line that says, and your signs, but we can't situate it contextually. And then it continues, they explained in the statutes of Moses, and then there's a break where there's like the end of a paragraph, and here's where we can actually get into the meat of it and see it and read a continuous text. And this is what it says. So Elivu, the name of some guy named Elivu, responded and said, "Listen, congregation of Yahweh, and pay close attention, the whole assembly." And then there's a break here, and it continues. It says, "A man is accursed who does not stand, keep, and perform all of the commandments of Yahweh by the mouth of Moses, his Messiah. Nor does he follow after Yahweh, God of our fathers, who brought us from Mount Sinai. For he has spoken among the congregation of Israel face to face, as a man speaks with his friend." As I was, speaking with Yahweh
Like
just
right
before
now.
this
Yeah.
stream began. Yes, right. As a man speaks with his friend, or as a man might reveal to his friend, he has showed us a blazing fire above the sky. And upon the earth he has stood on the mountain to make known that there is no God except for him, and there is no rock like him. So the word rock there, tsur, is a word that's often applied directly to Yahweh. It's like a nickname we see in Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses. The congregation, so that's the end of Elivu's speech. And it says, the congregation answered, trembling had gripped them because of the glory of God and the terrible sound, and they stood at a distance. And Moses, the man of God, was with God in the cloud, and the cloud concealed him. For there's a break, and it says, when he was sanctified, and as an angel he spoke with his mouth. For who among flesh is like him, a man of the Hasidim, and who was never created before or since. And that's unfortunately the end of the column. But that's a text that in this second part, I'm not even entirely sure what to do with this. This is obviously, this guy Elivu is making an impassioned appeal. An impassioned appeal on behalf of Moses, saying, look, we absolutely need to listen to this guy, the Messiah of Yahweh, the man of God. And then so
I'll be right back. I'm sorry. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Continue.
So it kind of fits into some of what I think is happening in the earlier column, where Moses' authority maybe is being challenged to some degree. But this guy is offering an apologetic on behalf of Moses. But importantly, this is a text that it's not what we would call a biblical text, precisely because it doesn't look like anything really that survives in our Bibles. But the very important question to ask at this point is, the people who collected these manuscripts, the people who had this particular scroll commissioned, basically written up, what did they think this was? And I would suggest to you from a very pragmatic physical perspective, because first and foremost, all the Dead Sea Scrolls are artifacts. They're physical objects, and we should take that physicality very, very seriously. And we should absolutely be using that in our evaluations of what these texts were, why they were important, what they meant for the people who wrote and collected them. And this looks every bit, from a physical perspective, as significant for the people who wrote and collected this literature as any copy of Isaiah or Genesis or Deuteronomy or what have you. And this is the point.
Mm-hmm.
The people who wrote and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls, the people who lived in Palestine, the Jewish communities living in Palestine from this period, I would suggest the Jewish communities anywhere across the Roman Empire, collected literature. Certainly, they collected texts that survived in the Hebrew Bible, but they collected all sorts of things, stuff that they probably thought was just as important.
Can we
Just as
use an
useful.
example of saying Paul's letters, for those who come from the Christian tradition, were not written as scripture. They became scripture over time, and it depended on who, I suspect, preferred Paul. And we're like, yeah, we like that guy. And so whatever he wrote was sacred. I imagine this literature to these people was on the same par of sacredness as you're saying Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, or any canonical text that Bible believers, would have put it on.
And it wasn't, and I think that's the super important point here is it wasn't just those texts. There was all sorts of stuff, and all sorts of stuff that none of us have ever heard of before, in part because it was lost to history, but now frustratingly because so few people are talking about it. Like, you've never heard about this text before. I am quite confident that of the nearly 400 people watching this stream now, nobody has ever heard of this text before. The editors who wrote up the edition for this text gave it a sexy title. They called it apocryphal Pentateuch, I think is what they called it. So, but this is a fascinating text because it communicates to us all sorts of things about how they, not just about what they thought of a scripture was, if anything, but it communicates some pretty fascinating things to us about their perspective of their own history. And it tells us some things about how they felt about Moses too, right?
Right.
His Messiah, the man of God, the guy who was shrouded in a cloud.
But the Enochian stuff would have been different. So, you kind of wonder if they're competing sects already here in this literature.
That's an idea that has been bandied about for a while now by scholars, and I think there's definitely something to it. That so much of what we call Enochic literature, texts that were attributed to Enoch, the patriarch, were a type of a Torah that seems to have been in competition with the Mosaic Torah, that there was an elite priestly community, that maybe at one time even controlled the Jerusalem temple, that wanted nothing to do with the Torah of Moses and actually preferred the Torah of Enoch. Right?
Who's right?
So, right. So that's the Second Temple Bible.
Isn't it fair to say that the winners of history became right, even if they weren't? And this is the same for orthodoxy within Christendom. It's like, why aren't Enochian, maybe there are some really small splinter sects of Jews out there that are Enochian, but it's like, why didn't that win out? Why did it become rabbinic Judaism? Why didn't Enochian tradition, without Moses being the central figure, become the version? Well, they obviously didn't win out in history, even if they were at one point in power, like you said. So the same thing could be of the threat of Marcion in early Christianity as to why we need to get rid of this so that our clout and our apostolic succession is the right one. And so it's like a common motif and theme that I find within all of this stuff going on. But I'm fascinated as you are, and that's why I wrote my post today. Someone said it sounded condescending, and I'm like, well, I'm just being confident and being funny because people run around with confidence that you're going to hell for not believing in these things. And I'm like, I'm pretty confident that they're wrong. So I'm literally, in a way, bringing, some energy back to that. But we have a lot of super chats, and I don't know if you want to wrap up about these manuscripts, or if you want to get into the super chats and we wrap up at the end. What do you want to do?
So I think that's most of what I went on to say today. I do want to encourage people, and I'll mention it again at the end, that if this is interesting or if this is exciting to you, this is exactly what I'm doing in my series, the Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically. There's Qumran K4. I am excited and I'm passionate about what the scrolls have to tell us about the Bible and about early Judaism, but even more importantly about the religious traditions that lie behind that. And I'm also excited about how the history of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls has shaped the way in which we think about the manuscripts. So check it out.
I just posted it in the chat. Get in the kingdom before the doors shut on you. So subscribe, go leave a comment, let Kipp know you came over from MythVision. It always helps him know, okay, Derek's
Yes,
team's
sir.
over here. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see MythVision in the house.
Yeah.
Shane Torres says, Dr. Kipp, in your opinion, is the Katif
Oh.
Hinnom scrolls text quoting an actual document, numbers, or is it quoting a tradition later added to numbers?
It's a very good question. And I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. So we have two amulets from Katif Hinnom, which is right in there around Jerusalem. And they're these tiny little things that are beaten silver, and they have scratched on them text written in Canaanite script. And I'm not sure if it's both of them. It's certainly one of them. I think it might actually be both. Preserve a form of a blessing that looks very much like the Aaronic blessing that appears in Numbers 22 or 23. I can never remember. Or is it 24? It's one of those. But there are some important textual differences too. And the text on both the amulets, like I said, is not the same as each other. So I think these are very early. They date to the 6th century BCE. So I believe scholars tend to date them right to basically the days before the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, like that kind of thing. So it's what we would consider First Temple. They're really our only First Temple texts of anything that survives in the Bible. I mean, so now it's fashionable in some circles to look at these and say, oh, well, the Torah was so important to these people that they made magical amulets out of it. They pulled the text out of the Torah and they made these into it's like these were rolled up little is like a rolled up little amulet. Somebody wore it around his neck or on his body somewhere, or her, to protect them from harm or sickness or what have you. So this isn't a text that you read. It was a magic object, right?
Kind of like the Mount Ebal curse tablets, so to speak. It's like, did
And
they read Joshua and then make this, or is this a tradition in this region or location?
And this plays into our ideas about writing too. Like in this period, writing is for some people it's about communication, but I would say for probably many more people it's like magic power, right? And one of the reasons for that is because people couldn't read. People had these ideas about the relationship between writing and the gods, and they picked up these ideas because for so long writing was an institution of the priesthood and the royal house, and they this is what they did. And it played into they played up this idea that this is part of divine communication, right? So it's little wonder people thought that writing was magic. So it was even more important to them that they had like the text itself probably didn't matter. It was the fact that it was written on this object, and that it was written down was the thing that was super protective for them. So, but I have to finish my answer here. So it's fashionable in some circles to say, well, this came out of the book of Numbers. I think the more sensible way to approach this is that this was a blessing that existed independently, was a common thing that people would say, or that was recited, or that people would then start writing down and using amulets, and over time made its way into the text of the Torah and became part of the Book of Numbers.
Thank you so much for that. I was thinking of one example, and it doesn't completely shift over, but I think about conspiracy theorists who think these organizations have all this power because they're left in the unknown, like the Freemasons. I got a friend who left his 3rd degree Masonic Bible and his apron here.
Yeah.
He's no longer a believer. And so anyway, he came and visited to talk about Mormonism. And there's so many people, because they don't know what goes on, or they don't even care to investigate, maybe, or maybe they've been told something about it. They have this almost like they have magical powers and they're controlling the world. And it's not a good, perfect analogy, but they have more power than really what they do because they don't know. So people who are left in ignorance assume more to what the mystery is than what really is.
Yeah.
And I imagine the same can be done by the elite priest.
This is an idea. This is an idea. Let's not kid ourselves. This is an idea that carries forward. Like, one of the great, this great reverence that Muslims have for the Quran. The reason why within Judaism you can't destroy a Torah scroll, you have to retire it and essentially bury it. This is where this comes from. This idea that there's a special quality of, the word of the objects themselves. I remember when I was a Christian, we used to there was always somebody, coming to speak to us at church or at Bible camp or in college chapel or what have you, and so often it was somebody there to make us feel bad about how poorly we were, performing our own religion. And I remember distinctly one of these guys coming in and saying, don't put your Bible on the floor, don't throw it on a chair, don't this
put
is
something on
this
top
is
of
the
it.
word of, don't put some no this is the word of God. You look after it, you take care of it, you put it on, you put it on the shelf, you put it on a place of prominence. And how antithetical is this to, the one of the primary ideas of the reformers, right? That it's not the iconography, it's not the objects, it's the ideas and the substance is what's in the word. But some of these things are really, really hard to shake, right?
I imagine too. I mean, we hear the stories about the church chaining a Bible to the pulpit, and like
Yeah.
that they didn't even want. They put the Bible. They made sure it stayed in Latin. They didn't want the common folk. They only wanted, again, that tradition of the priest to read scripture. And then, the reformers thought we need to get this into everyone, especially like Martin Luther and such. Everyone needs to read this stuff. And they started to divorce from that kind of thing, even though I see it still in Protestantism, where it's like, don't put anything on top of your Bible. Make sure your Bible's on top of the thing. And like, so there's still, it's wild, but I see what you're saying, and that's interesting. Thank you, Kipp. Welsh backgammon.
Yay, super
Welsh
sticker.
backgammon. Yeah. Thank
I
you
think
so
it's
much for that.
backgammon. You know
Gammon.
backgammon, don't you? It's a game.
Oh,
It's one of the most ancient games.
I didn't know that.
It's thousands of years old, backgammon. Yeah.
Huh. Thank you so much. Stephen Bragg, your April Fool's joke was great. It pissed a lot of people off, I can tell you that much. But yes, thank you. A lot of people didn't get it till I winked twice at the end. And even then, you could tell some people didn't watch the whole video. So that's their fault that they did that. But there were people like, unsubscribed. And I'm like, wow, you don't even watch the content. So
wow.
Anyway, all the ones in the house just showing love. I really appreciate it. Doc Pleromanot, does the Bible or the biblical Hebrew dialect with linguistic updating used by both the Samaritans and the Yahad suggest a possible link? I guess having text outside the Torah, like the Isaiah scroll, would be a non-starter for the former.
Yeah, definitely on the second part of that question. Uh I haven't looked into the specifics of the linguistic changes. I haven't spent a lot of time personally in the Samaritan Pentateuch. Um uh, Only so far as a source of textual criticism. Can you put the question back up on the screen,
Oh
please,
yeah,
Derek? Because I
absolutely.
want to make sure I
Sorry.
I get this. But I think um what from a regional perspective, certainly I think what's happening in the Samaritan Pentateuch is something that's happening more globally, like within the region with regards to the language and how they're using it. So I would say without having looked into this, that my suspicion is yes. In terms of there being like in terms of this indicating a possible link, I think this is where it becomes more difficult, because what's if the linguistic updating is likely something that's happening more naturally and less intentionally, which is why we would see it within both, right? They're not that far away from each other. The Samaritan community in and around Gerazim, and the people writing and collecting the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran. You can get from both places to Jerusalem, within about a day.
Hmm.
So it's I would say it's possibly related, not certainly related. Now, one thing that I will suggest, and here's a whole other wrinkle in this, is Sydney White Crawford, who's done maybe more work than anybody on the sorry, my dog's losing her mind
I
here.
could hear it.
She's done maybe more work than anybody on the transmission of the Pentateuchal texts. Hold on a sec.
Do you want to let the dog out? Dogs needed love and attention too, just like humans.
Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to let her out. I have to
Oh.
keep her in here with me.
Can I
So we'll
drop the
just keep
question
her
so we
quiet.
can see the dog?
So yeah, you can. Oh, there she is. There we go.
Oh.
She was looking straight at the face of Yahweh too.
I can tell. She's brighter
So
than you, so you could
I
see
know,
that
right?
your
Well,
sins
I mean,
are.
she just got back, right? I've been fading here
I'm
for
putting
a
you full
little while
screen.
now.
I'll be right back.
Okay, so the Sydney White Crawford has done most of the work on the transmission of the text of the Torah in early Judaism in the Second Temple period. And she worked with Emmanuel Tove on the so-called rework Pentateuch manuscripts. I believe she might have even done apocryphal Pentateuch, the one that I showed you earlier. So she has talked about, and I think she's onto something here. She has talked about a scribal tradition, like a scribal school, that we see reflected in the Samaritan Pentateuch, and we also see it in like these reworked Pentateuch manuscripts, and we see it in other texts not related to the Pentateuch. But she has suggested that at an earlier stage, that is lying behind both Qumran and the Samaritan community, that maybe this is like a Levitical text tradition. Um, yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So it would be unsurprising then that there's a relationship between the two, the Samaritans and the Jews living at the Yachad.
Thank you so much. Metatron, the angel with the
Metatron.
666. Thank you for showing up. How does the religious practices, beliefs, and rituals associated with worship of foreign gods differ from those dedicated to Yahweh during the First Temple period?
So this is a difficult question to answer, because all we have to go from here is a smattering of evidence. We've got what the Hebrew Bible tells us of the religious traditions and rituals of Yahweh. But most scholars are convinced that these are much later reflections of, religious traditions that probably weren't practiced the way that they're described within the Hebrew Bible. And on the other side of this, and one of the reasons scholars think this is because uh, the archaeological picture of Israel from the Iron Age doesn't look anything like the way the Hebrew Bible describes it,
Right.
right? So I would suggest to you that on the basis of the very little bits of information that we do know, and this is taking seriously, the discoveries on the ground, the artifacts that have been found from the period, and which are, clearly related to Yahweh worship. It looks very likely that the worship of Yahweh was no different in Iron Age Israel than was the worship of any of the Canaanite gods. That, Yahweh was properly just another Canaanite god, another Canaanite deity.
Thank you. Thank you, Metatron. Imnag in the hizzy. I did not see a question. Thank you for the super
Menag.
sticker. You achieve true salvation each time, my friend. JC in the house. Mormon founder Joseph Smith claimed Abraham himself wrote the Book of Abraham, now LDS scripture, in Reformed Egyptian on papyrus. Reformed Egyptian.
Wow.
He bought that were actually funerary rolls. I think they mean to say scrolls. Self-deception comments.
So scroll is just a fancy word for roll. So
Oh, okay. Okay. So
it's
I'm
no, it's good. It's good. Uh I mean, I that's interesting. Poor Joseph Smith. Uh but it's wild too, right?
yeah,
How much religion can propagate and survive amid things that, we can point clearly to show, yeah, this is bullshit, right?
right.
So it just, I think maybe my comment would be, this is more than anything just a testimony to the durability of religion as an idea.
Mhm.
And this is certainly, the durability of religion as an idea is something that's super important to the transmission and development of texts at any period in the history of any religion.
And I've talked to several ex-Mormons who say finding out that the Book of Abraham or, these different problems in Mormonism is really what started to make them doubt it and not believe anymore. But I think it's fascinating. Like you said, the durability of religion. I'd go further to just say the desire for humans to want things to be true, even
Yeah.
if they're not. Like they want it to be true. And this is what I've been saying about Christian apologetics. In fact, I think I've got some Christian apologists triggered from yesterday's video. So stay tuned. I'm planning on doing another video response about this. And my two
just to just to build onto that, I think one of the reasons why it took such a long time for scholars to catch on to the fact that a bunch of these fragments in private collections were modern forgeries is just this too. There's such a strong desire for these artifacts to be authentic
right.
that for many scholars, I think it overrode their sensibilities.
Wow. So even the most elite of
We're all human,
experts are
right?
one. Yeah. Everybody is susceptible, is the point. Gettysburg Demoniac, thank you for the super chat. Why aren't Bible translations today relying on the Septuagint, considering there are oldest copies of the Old
Oh,
Testament?
but they are. The Bible of the Eastern Orthodox Church is the Septuagint. So if you want, when you go to go to the Eastern Orthodox Church. And I mean, so there's a bunch of stuff in this question. Why not? Well, I mean, the it's not a simple answer to that question, but there's a variety of reasons why. I mean, the Hebrew Bible is clearly not going to reflect the Septuagint. We don't have any complete Hebrew copy of anything that looks like the Septuagint. We've got copies of Septuagint traditions and texts written in Hebrew from Qumran, but these are all surviving scraps and fragments from individual scrolls, right? Um, and the Masoretes would have been absolutely loath. This is after the destruction of the Second Temple. This is after the expulsion of the Jews from Rome, right? I've been absolutely loath to think that any of their writings should be preserved in Greek. So, that's one side of it. Why didn't the reformers adopt the Septuagint? I think what they were trying to do was to get to what they believed was the purest expression of the biblical text, and in their minds the purest expression wasn't what survived in like Codex Vaticanus or Codex Sinaiticus. It was it was what we could find in the in the earliest Hebrew manuscripts, because the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. So, well, I'm not entirely sure how else to answer that question. So our oldest Hebrew codices, which would be Leningrad and Aleppo, and now this new one. I don't know if it's actually gone on the auction block yet, but there's another one that's been listed for sale at Sotheby's more recently. I can't remember the name of it, but so these all date to like the 9th, 10th century AD, CE.
Right.
And yeah, they're all Hebrew, and they're all at this point a pretty solidly fixed text that mirrors what we have in our modern printed Hebrew Bibles.
Thank you so much. Gettysburg is back. What impact did the Dead Sea Scrolls Peshers have on our understanding of how prophecy interpretation function in antiquity?
That's video 4, my friend. I'm working on that now. So let's say, for those who don't know, one of the types of literature that were discovered at Qumran, there's a number of these copies of texts that have been given the designation Pesher. Pesherim is the plural, and Pesher basically just means interpretation or meaning. And these texts are called this because this is a word that occurs consistently throughout them. And what they are is they'll cite a passage from the Bible. Some of the more famous ones. It was actually one of the very first scrolls that were discovered in 1947. Was a scroll of I think it's like Habakkuk chapter 2 and 3. But then it cites the text from Habakkuk in order. But so it'll cite a few verses, and then after that it says Pishro, or its interpretation. And then what follows is an explanation by the scribe as to what the text actually means. And when you read through a few of these, you quickly come to discover that what's happening in these texts is not anything that any good seminary teaches about how to do Bible exegesis, right?
Right.
It's much more akin to reader response sort of approaches to the Bible. And basically what's happening within the Pesharim is that it's treating the biblical text like a special secret coded text that's actually about what's happening to us now, and they'll treat
Yeah.
it like an allegory, right? So for the people who wrote and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Pesharim are actually pretty useful for helping us to reconstruct the history of their movement,
Mhm.
because they explain to us through their interpretations of Habakkuk and Nahum and Micah and Isaiah and the Psalms, things that they were going through, but which they believed were actually reflected in these coded, mysterious ancient scriptures. So, but he raises a really good question. Is this prophecy then? And for a long time, scholars are like, no, couldn't be prophecy. This is something totally different. It's nothing like prophecy. But I mean, it's what they're doing, right? Like it's a form of divination whereby you're looking at you're looking at this source and saying, I can predict, or I am treating this source like it's predicting the future. But then you'll notice that in some of the Pesharim, and then you see elements of this same technique applied to other texts within the Qumran scrolls, where they're starting to say, well, this is actually going to happen still. This isn't something that happened to us. This is something that we're expecting to happen. So they're actively engaging in what looks like, for all intents and purposes, prophecy. And I'll just say one more thing. What else is really interesting about them, and what really attracted scholars' attention early on, was how similar these look to the ways in which New Testament authors treated their scriptures, right? So, I mean, the book of Matthew is just rife with this exact same approach to the biblical text,
Right.
but
Right.
then applied to Jesus. I like to use one of my favorite examples to use, is because it's one people are familiar with. In I think it's in Matthew chapter 3, Matthew 2 or 3. It's right at the beginning of the book of Mark. It appears in all the Gospels. Right at the beginning, uh, the Gospel author cites Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3, which says, there's a voice crying in the wilderness,
Yeah.
go and prepare the way of Yahweh, make straight the paths for our God. And then the text applies this image to John the Baptist. So in 1QS, the community rule at Qumran, they have cited the exact same passage, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. But the way that they're reading it, without changing a single word in it, is totally different from the way that the New Testament writers are reading the text. And the way they read it is, in the wilderness, comma, a voice cries out, or a voice cries out, comma, in the wilderness, go and prepare a way for the coming of Yahweh, make straight the highways for our God. And the people who wrote and collected the Dead Sea Scrolls said, see, this is talking about us. This is exactly what we've done. We've gone out into the wilderness and we're getting ready. We're getting ready for the coming of Yahweh in the last days.
That is interesting. Thank you so much for that. Gettysburg again says, has a fragment of Nehemiah been found from the Dead Sea Scrolls?
No, there have been no authentic fragments of Nehemiah found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There have been 2 forgeries of Nehemiah that there's one in the Skoyan collection, and there is one in the Museum of the Bible collection, and they're both forgeries. But there is possible reason to think that even though we haven't found any fragments, it seems possible that Nehemiah was there. And the reason we think this is because there is at least one fragment from Qumran of Ezra, and Ezra and Nehemiah, as near as we can tell, were 2 compositions, very similar to the 12 so-called minor prophets. Ezra and Nehemiah appears were two compositions that were always collected together. So by virtue of the presence of Ezra, scholars have concluded that, well, it seems plausible that this fragment survived from a larger manuscript that also contained Nehemiah. But that is speculation. It's reasonable speculation. But no, we have no physical copy of Nehemiah from Qumran.
Thank you, Gettysburg. Imnag says, are there any other writings in the ancient world that plagiarize other stories as much as the Bible? I think not, and this is why I was so angry when I started to deconvert. Thank you, Dr. Kipp, for the work you do.
You're most welcome. But I would say that as I keep
Trying to nail the plagiarism
people,
thing, right?
It's this is just what ancient people did. And when you look into it deeply and carefully enough, you will come to discover that the Jews and even the ancient Israelites, if what we have is, we can trace all the way back that far. The Christians, the ancient Near Eastern people were all over, were doing the same thing. Josh likes to talk about how the Anzu myth from Sumeria was reconstituted by the Babylonians.
Right.
The myth of Atrahasis was reconstituted by the Babylonians. We have all sorts of these examples prevalent throughout the ancient world, and we probably we'd probably see this much more clearly. Some of this is just by virtue of the accident of survival. The church and the rabbis are the ones who continued to copy and preserve their own texts, and as a result, so much has been lost to history. But I think it's likely, it's probably virtually certain, that if we had access to as much of the ancient material as we do the Bible, you'd see the exact same thing taking place all over the place. And it wasn't something nefarious either. Like, I think people need to get over this idea that the Christians or the Jews are trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. No, not at all. Like, people recognized what was happening, but that's just it, right? This is just the way you wrote. This is what religion was all about. This is what culture was all about.
This is the problem, though, Kipp. And I'm with you. It's once we know what is really going on, it's like, oh, but the people who have been taught today by Christians, Jews, whoever they may be, they have been told a certain message.
Yeah.
That message is wrong. So the reality of what's really going on, it will destroy the worldview you had because you were
you're
told.
Right about that. Yeah.
So I was thinking of the Greeks, like look at Serapis, or even Dionysus is another model of Osiris. And so it goes on and on and on. So there's borrowing is a better word than plagiarize, even though today, if you were in a classroom and someone said, I need you to write a paper authentically through your own research without copying, every one of these you could find a place where you could, if you were a professor, you'd say, that's plagiarism or copying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But that's it's none of this stuff would pass. If you churned it in, if you fed it into the Turnitin algorithm that I used to use when I taught, all this stuff would come back as plagiarized. But it's, plagiarism is a modern idea.
Yeah.
I was going to say something else and I lost my train of thought, but
I get it.
You get the idea.
Yeah. And I just think figuring that out is important. Courtney Brown says, MythVision is the best.
Yes,
Thanks for all you do. Always great subjects and guests. Thank you.
No duds here, guys.
Huh?
No duds here.
Exactly. Shane Torres again, Dr. Kipp. When was the Hebrew Bible considered canonized or completed? I've heard some people say early, before Christ, and others said late. I'll be right back.
Yeah, okay. Boy, Derek's busy today. And this is really the problem here is you're going to get different answers depending on who you're talking to. And I would I continue to think one of the reasons for that is not just the confessional turf protection that many scholars their own beliefs and their own faith conviction, but I think it actually has something to do with the way that scholars have been trained as well. It's hard, even if you're trying to be as unaffected by your own biases as you can. It's hard to get over those, um, even with the purest of intentions. So, in my opinion, I don't like the word canon as applied to the Hebrew texts, and you correctly um, added the word completed there. Um, I don't think it's something we can meaningfully talk about prior to the destruction of the Second Temple. Uh, and the reason for this is because there's really nothing prior to the destruction of the Second Temple that we can point to that shows any kind of closure or any kind of completion. We have, and the way people there's various ways of going about um, figuring this out. One of the ways is when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls, look at the numbers of texts that they were collecting, the way that they were copying their literature, what they quoted or cited, provides an idea of a shape of what we would call authoritative texts or forms, early forms of something that's approaching scripture. Other ways to do this is you look at within the New Testament. There's a couple of places where Jesus makes reference to the Torah and the prophets. And the temptation there is to conclude that this is the entire Torah. Well, he's speaking of the Torah of Moses, certainly, but the temptation there is to go, well, this is the Torah of Moses, and then the prophets is everything that the rabbinic Jews included within their collection of prophets. But again, there's no certainty what the prophets were at this point, what was included, what was excluded. Jesus also talks about David, which probably is some form of the Psalms. But again, this is problematic because depending on what your copy of the Book of Psalms looks like, uh, how much of it is actually attributed to David or not is a matter of debate. Another one of the really interesting manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls is an exquisite uh, Psalm scroll that came out of Cave 11 that identifies itself as the Psalms of David. Like this is the collection of the Psalms that David put together.
Right.
It's not all 150 Psalms. The contents of the scroll contain only the stuff from the second half of the Book of Psalms. And there's Psalms in there that don't appear in the Masoretic Psalter. Psalm 153 and 154 are contained in there, which we know from the Syriac Bible. But then there's a couple of other things, like something called the Apostrophe of Zion appears in this manuscript. It also appears in another much older collection of Psalms, like Qumran 2. So it's a really, really complicated question. I'll say one more thing. Ben Sira was a very influential teacher and writer from the early second century BCE, prior to the establishment of the Hasmonean kingdom. And he famously wrote a long poem, like a tribute to Israel's ancestors. And scholars have looked at the contents of his poem and attempted to tease out or draw some conclusions as to what Ben Sira's Bible looked like on the basis of what he says within this poem. And it looks very similar to what survives, but of course there are some really interesting omissions and possibly inclusions within the contents of this. So all that to say, I would say it's something you can't speak meaningfully about prior to the destruction of the temple, in large part because there's so many different communities of
Mhm.
Jews that are doing like their own things with the text. So the Hebrew Bible is really, um, it's a rabbinic document. So this is something that happened certainly after, at maybe the 2nd century CE.
Thank you. The Muslim apologist, what is the current status of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and how will future research continue to shed light on their significance and meaning?
Well, the status of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think he means status of Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship. Um, so it's we're at a point now where the scrolls were discovered 70 years ago. They have now all been published. And there has been significant analysis committed to their contents and their meaning. What I would say is, I think we're at a point here where uh, we are very slowly but surely transitioning away from old ideas about the scrolls. And I've talked a little bit about this today with regards to, the relationship to the Bible, with regards to the relationship to each other, even ideas with regards to, there's 11 caves in and around the area of Qumran that have been designated, you know, the Qumran caves, possibly artificially, because I mean, we have ideas about the relationship of the caves to each other, but again, lots of questions too, like we're still
Yeah.
not certain. So some of the future, what the future looks like is reevaluating many of these older connections that scholars used to make. This is the work that I and my colleague Matthew Monger at MF Norwegian School of Theology are starting to do, and we hope to be doing over the next 4 or 5 years, is trying to deconstruct scholarly categories of the scrolls, looking at them through a lens that takes more seriously their value as physical objects, as objects of material culture, and see what happens
Mm.
to the shape of the collection and our ideas about what the collection is and how it's related to the caves, to the site as a result of this, right? So I would suggest that, over the next while, their significance and their meaning is probably going to shift, from the way that scholars have talked about them in the past. These ideas are going to continue to improve and to change as we continue to learn more. Sorry, I don't know if that's a great answer, but
No,
that's
I think
that's
that.
what I think is happening.
Thank you, and I hope that we can make that trip go.
Yeah.
But anyway, that'll
Yes.
hopefully happen.
Yes.
Ben Jones, isn't Hindu scripture older than Judaism? What kind of influence did Hinduism have on Judaism, Christianity? Consider the influence of the Silk Road.
I don't know anything about Hindu scriptures, so I really have no idea. And because I don't know anything about Hindu scriptures, I don't know anything about any kind of influence they could have had on Judaism or Christianity. But in the volumes of reading that I've done about both Judaism and Christianity, this is not something that anybody talks about.
Mhm.
So I would suggest it, probably none. And maybe there's something there. It's not something that anybody has looked into, for whatever reason. I would suggest probably because there's nothing there, but who knows?
And I would just, my personal response as someone who looks into this stuff. I know later we definitely have the Silk Road. We definitely have Manichaeism. We
Mhm.
have forms of a mixture of Eastern and at that point Western ideas, because to us it's all the East, but to them it's like kind of West and East.
Yeah.
That maybe there's some influence, maybe there's some way in shape or form, but I wouldn't say it's nearly as significant as the closest context of
Yeah.
the culture surrounding them rather than the distant ones in India. So that's my
And if
thoughts.
if If there is, I'm absolutely the wrong guy to talk about it. So,
Right.
because
Okay.
I just don't know anything about it.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate that. Seth of Valhalla asks, ChatGPT learns morality from the Bible.
The
Happens
Bible.
next.
What happens next?
Yeah.
What happens if ChatGPT learns morality from the Bible? Uh, Well, I don't know. I saw a maybe people caught this. John Oliver did a delightful uh um a delightful story on ChatGPT and the evolution of artificial intelligence and what's happening. Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe it's terrifying. It certainly seems like some of these some of these AI engines develop some absolutely horrific ideas about morality given their own devices and very quickly. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I'm probably the wrong guy to ask that question.
I could see some pretty bad stuff
Yeah.
coming out of that,
Uh,
in my opinion.
ChatGPT would probably explode because of all the internal inconsistency within a collection like the
Do I do this or
Bible.
do I not do this? I can't know if I'm supposed to do
Yeah,
this or
right.
this. Right. Oh gosh. Like there's no contradiction. Festering Boils, thank you for the super chat. Some rabbis say the Septuagint consisted only of the Pentateuch in Jesus' time, and the other books were translated later. Is there evidence of this?
um, if there's evidence of this, then it's within the manuscript tradition, which I'm not really familiar with. I know we have copies of like Greek translations of biblical texts dating fragments, little bits dating as far back as I think either the early first or the second century BCE, but I don't know what's on them. And I guess I mean my what I would say is there's possibly some currency to this idea if um if can you put the question back up there for a sec? Um if if all those fragments are just Torah texts, just Pentateuch, then this is an argument you could make. I honestly, I have no idea what the evidence for this is or what it looks like, but I would suggest that's where you would find it. Um, but uh, the um, I would say though, I think that's unlikely. And I'm basing this on things that I know pretty well, like the book of Jeremiah or the book of Daniel. I think there's pretty clearly Greek translations of those texts that are easily far earlier than the time of Jesus.
Mm. Thank you, Festering. A few more, and then I'll let you. We'll do a little plug here about the upcoming episode you're doing
Okay.
today. Seth of Valhalla says ChatGPT learns morality from Dead Sea Scrolls. Armageddon ensues.
Yeah, maybe.
Right. And then Atif, Bengish, what's the oldest complete copy of Genesis?
The oldest complete copy of Genesis would be a Greek copy that survives from the Codex Sinaiticus from it's the mid fourth, isn't it? Mid fourth century CE, so like 350. The oldest complete copy of Genesis in Hebrew would survive from the Aleppo Codex. Is it in the Aleppo Codex? It might not be in the Aleppo Codex. I don't remember. But it's in one of those big Hebrew Bible codices from the 9th or the 10th century. Just to give you an idea, like we have we have a whole bunch of fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls dating all the way back to the 2nd century BCE, or maybe even the late 3rd century that have text from the book of Genesis on them. Some of these fragments that survive look like they come from manuscripts of the size that would have contained the whole copy of Genesis. So I would say that while we don't have a complete copy, we certainly know that there were complete copies this early, at least.
Thank you so much for that, Kipp. Shameless plug, your YouTube. Let's get to 10K.
Shameless.
Go
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, go subscribe to Dr. Kill. He's got more stuff coming out. You'll be tuned for the series on the Dead Sea Scrolls that he's going to be giving. We're doing a course together, so that'll be coming out for sale when that is ready and edited, and you can purchase it, own it for life. It'll be 18 lectures, probably anywhere from 12 to 14 hours of material. So you will have a lot to chew on. I can't say for sure. I'd have to go back and double check. Once I'm done editing everything, I can calculate how many hours. But you've done a lot of work, and they can also go to your Patreon and actually get early access to the videos.
Yep.
And how many have you already from the beginning to end given how many of these you're going to do?
I don't know. I think it's probably going to be 20.
20?
So, yeah.
Wow.
But
okay.
But we'll see. It just depends on like I've put together an outline to this point, but I'm just writing it as I make them. So
Okay.
I'm uncertain how much time or space I'm going to need for every section that I have planned, but I bet it'll probably be close to 20 videos. So it's going to be like it's going to with the amount of time it takes me to make them, it's going to be I'm going to be making these for like a year or more. So, but yeah, it's a very long-term project for me. But I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, I've already got 3 videos and what is that? Like a little over an hour of material about the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So it's going to be it's going to be like a like taking a course or reading like an introductory book to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So yeah, that's what's there. And I was going to say with regards to the course, in addition to the lectures, Derek's lovely but brutally slave driving taskmaster of a wife had me put together I think I ended up with like 30 pages of documents and a different additional material just for the course, and that doesn't even include the all the PDFs of all the slide presentations that I use, so which are included as well. So you're getting a lot.
Yeah, there's a ton
and people should take the course.
Yes,
because it'll make your face shine like Yahweh.
That's it. You want to shine. Codex Sciaticus has only 21, 22, 23, 24 chapter.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Thank you.
So maybe Vaticanus?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Which is contemporary?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. And then there's my buddy Derek Bennett.
Go watch later, guys.
You're doing this in 2 hours.
3 hours. 2 hours? Does it say 2 hours?
Oh, about 2 hours and something.
Yeah, 2 hours 45 minutes.
Yep.
I'm gonna be joining Derek, and we're gonna change the world.
Yes, please go over and say coming over from MythVision.
Yeah.
Derek hates me, so I want to make sure that you tell. Of course, I'm joking, but go tell him. Here's the link. Go over there and say I came from MythVision. What are you gonna do? Okay, like what you gonna do about it? And that way, Derek feels happy. Because we scheduled this on a day where he's doing a stream for Derek and Derek. So it's 2 Dereks today that you're streaming with.
Derek Day.
It's Derek Day.
So, and people should know. So yeah, absolutely. Everybody here has to tune in to watch me on Derek's channel this afternoon. You are now obligated to do so. On Saturday, I am participating with the Slavery Super Panel. On Deep Drinks podcast, we're going to we're gonna get into more of the apologetics for slavery and talk about that. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So that is this coming Saturday. It's gonna be like noon for me. I'm on the West Coast. So yeah. And then I'm going to be on Jacob Berman's channel, History Valley, next week.
Well, let me share this one real quick. Then I'm going to share
April 12th. And then I will be with Josh Bowen, and I'm pretty sure you're supposed to be there too, Derek, on Secular Soapbox later on this month, talking about the documentary Hypothesis.
Yes, and I'm going to be silent. I'm going to be a lamb going to slaughter. I really don't have any expertise on that, but I might highlight something. That's something I feel like I have a good skill at.
People,
I hear you guys say
will
something,
tune in just to see your pretty eyes.
I'm just going to be like, "Ugh," and then everybody come and see us. So I just posted a few of those links in the description, and keep an eye out on our community tab. We're going to be, I always launch stuff. We got so much in the works. Kipp, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, guys. This was very fun. No, just subscribe, join my Patreon. See you around.
See you next time.
Back in Washington, Kipp Davis is getting his first look at a final prized fragment in the Museum of the Bible's collection.
This is a fragment that contains text from Genesis chapter 32, and it's supposedly from the 1st century BC or the 1st century CE.